Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, April 9th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Netanyahu says that he set a date for the Rafah invasion. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that there is a date set for Israel's plans to attack the southern Gaza Strip city of Rafah, but he didn't say what the date is. He said, quote, "The victory requires entry into Rafah and the elimination of the terrorist battalions there. It will happen. There is a date," end quote. So his comments came a day after the Israeli military withdrew troops from areas of southern Gaza, including the city of Khan Yunis, which it left in ruins. I mean, completely destroyed that city. And Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, said that the purpose of the withdrawal was to prepare for the invasion of Rafah. And so in response to what Netanyahu said here, the State Department said that they were not briefed by Israel on any potential date. The U.S. has said that it is opposed to Israel's plans to invade Rafah just because of, the over 1 million Palestinians who are sheltered there, and it would incur these huge civilian casualties. So the U.S. has said that they're against the plan, but it doesn't seem like they're threatening any sort of consequences if they go through with this. And we've seen Netanyahu and other Israeli officials say that they don't care. They keep saying, we're going to do it. It doesn't matter what the U.S. thinks. So Matt Miller, again, the State Department spokesman, said that Israel hasn't informed them, and he reiterated the U.S. opposition to the plan to attack the city. We still see the bombs, throughout the past few months. We've seen the U.S. warning Israel not to attack Rafah. And what has Israel said? They keep saying, well, we're going to do it. And the U.S. keeps giving them bombs and other weapons. So an update on the death toll in Gaza. Gaza's media office said on Monday that at least 33,207 Palestinians have been killed, including 14,520 children. And they said that this does not account for the thousands of people who are missing under the rubble. So the real death toll could be much higher. And it's also not clear if this number includes people who have starved to death, died of any sort of disease caused by the Israeli siege. We know newborn mortality rates are up. I don't think that those are being included for this overall death toll. This is mostly from the bombing. All right, so the next one here, Hamas and Israel say that no progress has been made in ceasefire talks. So both Hamas officials and Israeli officials said on Monday that no progress was made toward a hostage deal in Egyptian and Qatari-mediated ceasefire negotiations that are taking place in Cairo. Ali Barakam, a senior Hamas official based in Lebanon, said the Palestinian group had rejected the latest proposal from Israel. He said, quote, "We reject the latest Israeli proposals that the Egyptian side informed us of. The Politburo met today and decided this," end quote. Another unnamed Hamas official said that Israel had not changed its position, so that there was nothing new in the Cairo talks. And an Israeli official told Ynet that they still don't see a deal on the horizon and said that the two sides are still far apart. So a Hamas official told CNN that Israel's latest proposal did not address Hamas's key demands, which include a permanent ceasefire and the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. That is what Hamas is sticking to. This official said, quote, "The Israeli proposal does not respond to the questions that Hamas has asked in its original proposal, and that is any agreement should clearly include a ceasefire, a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops, even if it happens through stages, and the return of the displaced in complete freedom to their homes," end quote. So the CNN report said that CIA Director William Burns had presented a deal to bridge the gaps between the two sides. So there's this U.S. proposal, and the first phase of this would involve the release of 40 Israeli hostages in exchange for about 900 Palestinian prisoners. The U.S. would also like Israel to allow Palestinians who fled from northern Gaza to be able to return to the north, and apparently that's a big sticking point. Israel doesn't want to do that, so the big thing seemed to be the idea of a permanent ceasefire and letting the Palestinians go north. So, they're talking about freeing 40 Israeli hostages here. There was that recent Haaretz report that I covered that I think went pretty under the radar. I don't think many people notice this, that it says Israeli intelligence believes that only 60 to 70 hostages in Gaza are still alive. So 40 would be most of the remaining hostages. So pressure is mounting on Netanyahu to reach a hostage deal, and Israeli officials have accused him of intentionally sabotaging the talks. Netanyahu has made clear that any ceasefire he agrees to would only be temporary, as he is vowing to launch an invasion of Rafah. Of course, as I mentioned in the last story, he set a date to attack the city, or he said that he did. This is interesting, Yair Lapid, the former Israeli prime minister, who currently leads the main opposition party in the Israeli Knesset, he's in the U.S. this week, speaking with U.S. officials. He met with Antony Blinken on Monday, and he called for a hostage deal to happen. He said, quote, "A hostage deal is doable. It is a difficult deal. That is a deal we may not like, but it's doable and therefore needs to be made," end quote. It doesn't seem like any sort of deal is close right now, but we'll see if anything happens on that front. All right, so the next one here, a poll shows that 71% of Israelis think that Netanyahu should resign. This article is from the Times of Israel, and it just shows how Netanyahu is in trouble, and he has an interest in prolonging this thing and provoking a wider regional war. Opinion polls show nearly 3/4 of the Israeli public want Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resign against the backdrop of the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip, with half the country also preferring earlier elections for the Knesset. The Khan public broadcaster and Channel 12 both published surveys on Sunday to coincide with the 6-month milestone since this started on October 7th. So both polls showed the current government being ousted if elections were held immediately. And this is what polls have shown throughout this thing. Polls have consistently shown that Israelis want Netanyahu out once this is over. They do overwhelmingly support this horrific slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, but they are blaming, Netanyahu is getting a lot of the blame, rightfully so, for allowing the October 7th attack to happen. So Khan reported that 42% of respondents said that Netanyahu should resign immediately, and 29% that he should step down after the war concludes, making a total of 71% seeking his ouster. Of the rest, 21% said Netanyahu does not need to resign, and 8% said they don't know. In addition, 44% said there should be elections within a few months. 22% want elections sometimes over the coming year, and 26% said there should only be elections when they are next due, which is October 2026, so a long ways off. The Channel 12 poll found that 50% believe there should be early elections, and 41% were against such a move. And again, this is another thing polling has shown, that if there are elections, Netanyahu would lose. And there's just some interesting stuff here. There's a lot of details to this poll. It says in the Khan poll, 45% said Netanyahu bears the overall responsibility for what happened, while 35% put it on Herzi Halevi, who's the head of the Israeli military and the head of the Shin Bet security service. Ronan Bar also had some blame there. But and then regarding his performance in handling what's happening in Gaza, 68% said that Netanyahu is not doing well, compared to 29% who said that he is. So not getting much love from the Israelis, Netanyahu. All right, so the next one here, Nicaragua tells the ICJ that Germany is facilitating genocide in Gaza. So this article is from Middle East Eye. Nicaragua has brought Germany before the International Court of Justice for violating the Genocide Convention through its continued military and political support of Israel. On Monday, the Nicaraguan delegation presented its case as part of a 2-day hearing accusing Germany of facilitating the commission of genocide and demanding the court impose emergency measures to halt German arms exports to Israel and reinstate funding for the UN Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA. In his opening comments to the court, Nicaragua's ambassador said that through its continued support of Israel, quote, Germany is failing to honor its own obligations to prevent genocide or to ensure respect of international law, end quote. So Nicaragua is demanding the court issue 5 provisional measures, including that Germany immediately suspend its aid to Israel, in particular its military assistance, including military equipment, and that it reverses its decision to suspend the funding of UNRWA, the UN Palestinian Relief Agency. So this is interesting, and it's interesting that this is happening to Germany before a country is taking the U.S. to the ICJ. I know that there's been some talk of some countries doing that, but the U.S. is by far the biggest backer and supporter of Israel. But Germany is number 2. If you remember a few weeks ago, I think I went over a story that said 99% of Israeli arms imports come from the U.S. and Germany. The U.S. accounted for about 69%, and Germany accounted for about 30%. So Germany does sell them a lot of weapons, but the U.S., of course, is the big one, and the U.S. gives them the billions of dollars, $3.8 billion each year in military aid as well. All right, so, that would be an interesting decision if the ICJ did order Germany to suspend weapon sales or military aid to Israel, because we would see, again, the U.S. probably want to ignore that ruling as well. All right, so the next one here, 500,000 Democratic voters protest the Gaza slaughter. So more than 500,000 people have cast protest votes against President Biden's support for the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza in Democratic primaries across the country. According to The Nation, 530,502 people voted uncommitted or uninstructed where it's available on the ballot. The movement started in Michigan, which, of course, is a big swing state, and there they had over 100,000 people vote uncommitted. And there was a big one in Wisconsin last week, nearly 50,000 votes in Wisconsin, and that far exceeded what the organizers were hoping for. They wanted to secure 20,000 votes, which was the margin of victory for Biden over Trump in 2020. So the fact that they more than doubled that shows that Biden really is in trouble. And we've seen Democrats say that they think this is going to cost Biden in November. And despite, some of these things that we've seen Biden say over the past few days in response to the World Central Kitchen workers being slaughtered, there's no indication that he's really considering a big change in policy when it comes to supporting this horrific genocidal war that's happening in Gaza. So hopefully, we hope that this pressure works. There's 7 months now until the election. So hopefully something gives at some point. And there's, of course, people disrupting all the campaign events and things like that, calling him Genocide Joe. All right. So the next one here, Israel seeks to sell weapons used in Gaza. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Excuse me. And it says that Israeli weapons makers are selling some weapons platforms that have been utilized during the onslaught in Gaza, and that's how they're selling them. They're saying, hey, these are tested now. Israel's arms industry has found buyers among several Asian countries. So last week, several Israeli arms makers hosted delegations from multiple Asian nations at their booth at the Singapore Arms Expo. And so basically, some of the weapons platforms that they were featuring have been used in Gaza. And in coverage of this arms event, Haaretz notes that some of the drones that the Israeli arms dealers had were used not just in Gaza, but also by Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh, which ended in the ethnic cleansing of the over 100,000 Armenians who lived in Nagorno-Karabakh, and they're gone now. And Azerbaijan has conquered that territory, and Israel was selling them a lot of weapons. There's people tracking all the cargo planes going from Israel to Azerbaijan right before they launched their offensive. So an Israeli official said that it was primarily seeking clients who did not buy Chinese weapons. The official said, quote, ultimately, all the countries in the region are threatened by the Chinese. Here at the air show, they don't buy fighter jets from China, end quote. So it seems like Israel's trying to play up the angle that the U.S. is playing in the region, even though Israel does have a relationship with China that the U.S. is unhappy about. But anyway, I'm sure China, they're not happy with China lately because they've had some things to say about what Israel's doing in Gaza. But this is similar. You know, you see all these stories, and you've seen Ukrainian officials say this openly, that Ukraine is like a testing ground for Western weapons. It's just really sick stuff. All right, so the next one here, Israel raises agricultural land across Gaza and Lebanon. This article is from The Cradle, and it's based on an Axios report that said Israel's bombardment of Gaza in the 6 months since October 7th has not only flattened entire neighborhoods, destroyed critical infrastructure, and killed over 33,000 people, but has decimated Gaza's crucial agricultural lands as well. According to a satellite analysis conducted by someone from Kent State University, Israeli bombing has destroyed roughly 50% of tree crops and 42% of greenhouses within Gaza. And I know a lot of that is the olive groves that they have. So the level of destruction is much higher than other war-affected places that this researcher has studied, and such as Chechnya and Syria. The destruction of Gaza's agricultural land is one of the many ways Israel is making the besieged enclave uninhabitable, particularly as famine begins to set in. Israel's bombing and invasion of Gaza have also destroyed many of the olive groves in northern Gaza and prevented farmers from harvesting those that remain. And Israel has also destroyed Gaza's greenhouses. And I know the area in the north, so they're building that, what they call the buffer zone around Gaza, going 1 kilometer deep into Gaza's territory around the whole border. And I know in a lot of those areas on the border, they're like the agricultural lands, and that's what they're destroying there. And there was an investigation by a digital forensics team at the University of London that found Israel has systematically targeted agricultural land and infrastructure during the siege. What other reason, do you have to destroy agricultural land if you're not trying to starve the population? And they list other things that Israel has destroyed. They've destroyed a lot of bakeries. And of course, they've targeted schools, mosques, churches, hospitals, and cultural heritage sites. They've destroyed graveyards. So, this all adds to the case at the ICJ, the genocide case. All right, so the next one here, Iran's foreign minister opens a new consulate in Damascus. So Iranian foreign minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian was in Damascus on Monday to inaugurate a new site for Iranian consular services after Israeli airstrikes destroyed the former consulate building and killed 7 Iranians, including 2 senior generals, and one of them was a very high-level Quds Force commander. At a press conference with Syria's foreign minister, Amir Abdollahian vowed Iran would respond to Israel and said the U.S. should be held accountable due to its support for the Israeli military. He said, quote, "From here, from Damascus, I say with a loud voice that the United States is responsible for the terrorist crime against the Iranian consulate and must be held accountable, and the Zionist entity will be punished for its crime," end quote. He said that because the U.S. hasn't condemned the Israeli bombing of a diplomatic facility, that means the U.S. granted the green light to the entity. This is his words. He said, quote, "The U.S. granted the green light to the entity to commit that crime," end quote. He also met with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who condemned the Israeli bombing. According to Syria's Arab news agency, Assad said, quote, "The Zionist entity's bombardment on civilians in Gaza in such unprecedented, bloody, and brutal way is an indication to its failure to achieve its military targets," end quote. So this comes, the opening of the new Iranian consulate comes as the U.S. and Israel are preparing for a potential Iranian response. U.S. officials have said they're concerned Iran might hit targets inside Israel or target an Israeli diplomatic facility in the region. Iran has a history of being very restrained in its response to Israeli attacks, but this, of course, is a huge escalation targeting the diplomatic facility. So we will see. Only time will tell. I saw some reports that didn't seem pretty vague, and I didn't really think they were worth writing a whole story on, but said that apparently Iran sent a message to the U.S. that if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, then we won't respond. So maybe that's a possibility. I'm going to look more into that tomorrow. But I know the U.S. has denied it, but that doesn't really mean much. But I think that would be interesting if that is the message that Iran is sending to the U.S. All right, so the next one here. Israel kills Hezbollah commander and 3 others in a South Lebanon house. This article is from Jason Ditz. So at least 4 people were killed and an unspecified number of others were wounded when Israel carried out an airstrike against an occupied house in southern Lebanon. So among those killed was a leader in Hezbollah's Radwan force. The commander was identified as Ali Ahmad Hassin, and Hezbollah said that he was carrying out his jihadist duties at the time of his death, and the Radwan force is Hezbollah's elite commando unit. So a second Hezbollah man was slain, identified as a local figure, and a third Hezbollah figure remains unidentified, and then there was a 4th victim that it's not clear if it was Hezbollah or a civilian. It targeted a house in a residential community. So situation in across the Israel-Lebanon border, basically the same. Daily strikes, daily Israeli airstrikes inside Lebanon, and usually Hamas rocket fire into northern Israel. All right, so the next one here. The U.S. says that it conducted 94 missions against ISIS this year. So according to U.S. Central Command, the U.S. and its partner forces in Iraq and Syria conducted 94 operations against ISIS in the first 3 months of this year. CENTCOM said that it was involved in 66 operations with Iraqi government forces in Iraq and 28 operations with the Kurdish-led SDF in Syria. The missions resulted in the killing of 18 alleged ISIS operatives and the detainment of 63. So ISIS holds no significant territory in either Iraq or Syria, and the remnants of the group basically operate in rural areas. So these are usually kind of small raids that the U.S. is supporting here. And the fight against ISIS is the excuse that the U.S. uses to stay in Iraq and Syria. But the presence is, it's really more about countering Iran and its allies. That's become very clear. And according to the latest numbers, the U.S. has about 2,500 troops in Iraq and 900 in Syria. So this update on U.S. operations against ISIS comes after Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has been calling for the U.S. to leave, to pack up their bags and go. He wants a withdrawal. But of course, the U.S., they've entered these talks with al-Sudani's government, but they appear pretty determined to stay in Iraq. They don't want to leave. And al-Sudani has said that Iraqi security forces can handle these ISIS remnants by themselves. And when this says, the U.S. is involved in these operations, it's not clear. Likely, it's not U.S. troops actually carrying them out. It's probably support with intelligence, maybe some air support. It goes to show this is something that's kind of always going on, and so few people are aware of it. I think that the U.S. is still actually involved in combat operations at some level in Iraq and Syria. So that's Iraq. You have al-Sudani, the prime minister, who wants the U.S. out because of all those airstrikes the U.S. launched against the Shia militias in Iraq, which are actually part of the Iraqi military force that the U.S. is allied with, and they were on the same side, these Iraqi Shia militias, as the U.S. in the big war against ISIS. And then the U.S. turned around and has basically been fighting a low-intensity war with them for a few years now. So all of that benefits ISIS, of course, having these two, the Shia militias distracted by the U.S. But anyway, and then over in Syria, of course, the government is opposed to the U.S. presence, making it an illegal military occupation. But again, the ISIS is the excuse. The U.S. doesn't want to give up that foothold in eastern Syria. By backing the SDF, the Kurdish force, the U.S. controls about 1/3 of Syria's territory, and that includes oil and gas fields. And this is part of the economic war against Syria. The U.S. has these brutal sanctions on Syria that are specifically designed to prevent the country from rebuilding. So this is all part of that, as well as just kind of trying to keep Iran out of that area. All right, so the last story here, the U.S. to expand its naval base in Papua New Guinea. So the U.S. is expanding a naval base in Papua New Guinea as part of its military buildup in the Asia-Pacific that's being done to prepare for a future war with China. So the U.S. signed a defense cooperation agreement with Papua New Guinea last year that gives the U.S. military unimpeded access to 2 ports, 3 airports, and the Lombrom Naval Base. So this naval base, the U.S. Navy is planning 3 projects there. They're going to build a regional maritime training center, a small boat and bosun facility, and they're going to overhaul a 118-foot-long deteriorated small boat jetty. And these projects are estimated to cost somewhere between $11 million and $25 million. And the Trump administration actually announced back in 2018 that they would help expand this naval base in Papua New Guinea. And this was seen as a response to China's infrastructure projects in the region. The administration never allocated any funds for the project, so it hasn't happened yet. But now they're going to go through with this. And again, this is a base now that the U.S. military has access to. And the U.S. is saying that this project will support Papua New Guinea's military. So if you look at the map here, you see Papua New Guinea is just north of Australia. So it's pretty far from China, but these, the U.S. is expanding bases and reclaiming runways that the jungle took over, World War II era runways that the jungle took over. And this is all about planning for war with China. And they're very explicit about this. And the quote that I always use is from General Kenneth Wilsbach. And he's the former head of U.S. Pacific Air Forces. So he was in charge of the Air Force in the Pacific region. Now he's the head of Air Combat Command, but this is last year when he was still the head Pacific guy. He said, and this is when he was discussing Papua New Guinea, the U.S. potentially expanding bases there. He said, quote, "Obviously, we would like to disperse in as many places as we can to make the targeting problem for the Chinese as difficult as possible. A lot of those runways where we would operate from are in the Pacific Island nations," end quote. So I would say for these Pacific Island nations to heed that warning, because what he's saying is they want to turn your territory into a potential target in a future war, which would be World War III, the U.S. and China, and could end in nuclear, it could turn nuclear very quickly. So just the idea that this is what they're planning for is just really insane. At least it seems insane to me. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ted Snyder, Ukraine in NATO, what Blinken says versus what Blinken means. One from Ron Paul, Mitch McConnell cannot stop the non-interventionist tide. One from Fred Reed, enlisting in the military is a very, very bad idea. One from Wendell Griffin, the UN Security Council is a sham. And our spotlight is from Adam Weinstein and Trita Parsi, Biden's inaction on Gaza puts U.S. troops at risk. So please go check all of that out. You could always support this show by sharing it. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Like, subscribe, comment. If you watch the video, if you listen to the podcast, you could usually leave a rating or sometimes a review, depending on where you listen. All that stuff really helps out. Follow us on Instagram. It's looking really great over there. Follow us on X. Follow me on X. But I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.